Are you being undermined at work? When you have an undermining boss, it can make work a nightmare and is an easy starter for a toxic work environment. But is your boss undermining you at work? That's exactly what we're going to answer in this video. And if they are, stick around because I'm going to give you some tips on how to stop your undermining boss. If that all sounds good, tap that like button so I know you're ready, and let's just jump straight into it. The first and most obvious sign of an undermining boss at work is they nitpick you in public. They're calling out your work in team meetings, not in a good way. And when you send something for review, there is just more red lines than you ever thought possible, and definitely above and beyond what was reasonable. In my experience with undermining bosses, this is the first and most obvious sign that helps you identify if you have a boss that is undermining your work. And it can be particularly frustrating, especially when they are nitpicking you in public. Now, ironically, that brings us to the next sign, which is the exact opposite, where feedback is non-existent outside of said nitpicking. While they'll nitpick your writing about the use of an Oxford comma, they're not giving you any actual feedback that is helping you get better at your job. While they may occasionally throw you a scrap to acknowledge something that you did well, and particularly something that you need to do better, you're not getting a lot of substantive feedback that you can actually apply to become a better professional. And I want to differentiate this from the manager who just doesn't know how to give feedback, or maybe gives irregular feedback. We're talking about an almost complete absence of substantive feedback, even in the context of things like performance reviews. The third sign that you're being undermined by your boss is that they're micromanaging you. Now, you guys know I have a whole entire video on micromanaging, why it happens, what to do about it. I'll link it down below so that you can check it out after this one. But when your boss is micromanaging you, and especially when they're micromanaging you with the inference that you wouldn't be able to do your job successfully otherwise, and particularly when that's done in front of other people, it can be very undermining at work. Whether it's your boss telling you exactly how to do something mundane that you absolutely know how to do on your own, going back to nitpicking and overly critiquing your work in order to make it better, or demanding excessive oversight on the work that you're doing, these are all behaviors that can undermine you at work. Another sign that your boss has undermined you at work is that they're stealing your ideas. And is this ever frustrating when this happens? If you're finding that you're in situations where your boss is taking credit for the work that you did, the ideas that you're bringing forward to them, and especially when they're saying no to the ideas or initiatives that you're bringing to them in order for them to take ownership, these are all clear signs that you are being undermined by your boss. While your boss taking credit for your work isn't always a bad thing across all situations, in some cases, I would actually argue that it can work in your favor. In the scenario of an undermining boss, and especially when you're working with a toxic boss who is undermining you, these can be very detrimental. Because if your work doesn't have visibility beyond your team and your boss, no one is going to know that those things actually belong to you and they were things that you did or ideas that you had, and that can really impact your career progression. And because undermining bosses tend to do the next sign as well, this can be very harmful even for your professional reputation at work. And that next sign of an undermining boss is blaming you for mistakes and holding you accountable for things that you had nothing to do with, or making you fully accountable for things you're not fully accountable for. Look, I get it. Things are a team effort. When you are a contributor, you are part of the project's success or failure. However, your mere presence cannot make something fail entirely. Failure is a group effort. However, especially when you're dealing with a toxic boss who is undermining you at work, they can't have any accountability. That's just not something that they do. So instead of facing their own failures, they're just going to make their failures your failures, which obviously undermines you. That said, your undermining boss might not stop at blaming you for things that weren't your fault. Sometimes your undermining boss might actually sabotage you. One thing that undermining bosses do is they intentionally omit you from meetings. They intentionally omit you from projects. Really, what they're doing is they're holding you back from any opportunity that you have to shine, and also staging you for some kind of public blunders. And obviously, if you're missing crucial information, crucial meetings, and you're operating without the full picture, mistakes are going to happen. And even though those mistakes are not going to be your fault because you didn't know, your undermining boss has intentionally withheld that information, and then they're going to hold you disproportionately accountable, like we just talked about. I see this very commonly in conjunction with the 7th sign of an undermining boss, and that is, even though you're a superstar, they're giving you the most mundane tasks. Let's say, for example, that you are a superstar connector. You know all of the right people who can get all of the right things done. And this makes you the best person to take the lead on a project because you're basically best friends with everyone that needs to collaborate with you. Who better to take it on? Well, this is kind of terrifying for your undermining boss because your undermining boss is probably toxic. They're probably an insecure boss and they don't want you to look better than them or their favorite team member. So instead of assigning you to lead the project, they're going to assign you to do something totally random, like plan the next team happy hour. And I personally think this is really alienating, especially for my career besties here, because you're watching, you're obviously someone who cares about your career and is proactive in your success. So the fact that you are being held back is really unfair and very frustrating. But there's one more sign that we need to talk about before we get to the whole what to do about it thing. And that is the 8th sign, and that is the language that they use. There is a lot of undermining language that is used at work when you have a boss who undermines you. Your undermining boss probably uses some choice language. They make remarks about you being so young. You know, you're pretty good at this for a girl. It's amazing what you've been able to accomplish with only a bachelor's degree. You know those passive-aggressive, underhanded comments that they make, such as those, where on the surface level they're giving you some level of acknowledgement for a job well done, but really what they're doing is they're taking a jab. And what they're really doing is they are undermining your professionalism, your capabilities, and how deserving you are of being in the role that you're in. Now, obviously, this isn't a checklist. It doesn't have to be like, oh, if you checked 4, your boss is undermining you, but if you only checked 1, they're not. These are signs, and really you are in the position where you are able to determine if you have an undermining boss. Now, if you do feel like you have an undermining boss because these were hidden home, there's a few things that you can do about it. The first thing that I suggest you do if you have an undermining manager is to figure out why they are doing it. I think it's very easy to assume that an undermining boss is doing it intentionally and maliciously. I think in many cases, it comes down to insecurity and bad management. And for this, I do suggest having a little bit of compassion and a little bit of empathy. A lot of managers don't get any leadership training. They're thrown into roles that they're not very good at, and they themselves are not given the tools to succeed. Now, unfortunately, because of that insecurity it creates, some of them end up consciously or subconsciously taking it out on others, especially high potential employees. At least in my opinion, that's what I've seen. If your manager is new, if you know that they're not very confident in your role, this might be something that you're able to build a better relationship and maybe help boost their confidence to resolve them undermining you at work. Not saying that's the answer in all situations, but I'm saying that in some situations it will be. And really, anytime that we can approach a challenging situation at work with kindness and compassion, the more likely we are to succeed. The next step is to actually speak to them about it. Now, you do want to be careful in this conversation. You don't want to be triggering their defenses so that they get mad and start retaliating against you and stuff like that. But you're an adult. You're a professional who is serious about their job, and they should be as well. And feedback should be bi-directional. I know for me as a manager, if I was doing something wrong, I greatly appreciated when it was brought to my attention, as long as it was brought to my attention in the right way. Okay, to be honest with me, even in the wrong way, I was totally fine with it. Something else that can be very helpful in dealing with an undermining boss is just making sure that you're setting good boundaries and that you are being proactive. Look for workarounds. For example, if your undermining boss is stealing your ideas and taking credit for your work, is there ways that you can make more people aware of the work that you're doing without relying on your boss to do so? If your boss is nitpicking you in meetings with your team, ask them to give you that feedback in a more appropriate setting. Also, when the undermining behavior at work does not cease, especially if you have had a conversation with your undermining boss about it, make sure and keep a paper trail. This paper trail also applies to all of your awesomeness that you might not be getting credit for and all of the work that you're doing. So if they try to blame you for a mistake that you had nothing to do with, or if they're taking credit for your work, this is a way that you can prove the work that you did. But really, ultimately, when it comes down to an undermining boss who is really set in their ways, they are not open to change, and maybe they are a toxic boss, the only real solution when it comes to toxic work environments is to exit the toxic work environment. If you're at a larger company, is it possible for you to switch to a different team or have a different manager? And if it's not possible, is it time for you to start looking around to see what else is out there? Look, life is too short and you have way too much potential to waste it working for an undermining boss in a toxic work environment. If you think that your undermining boss may have actually created a toxic work environment, but you're not entirely sure, go and check out this video right here where I go through the toxic workplace signs. If this video helped you figure out if you're working with an undermining boss and what to do about it, make sure and give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel and it makes you my favorite person. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and becoming one of my career besties. As always, my friend, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.